What happens here?
All right, we are live.
1 second here. Let me get everything else all set up. That's really weird.
Welcome, everyone. People are trickling in. We'll just get started in a couple minutes.
Hello, everyone. I think we're all set now.
Yeah, so
David,
we're all good now.
I'm just gonna pass
All
you
right.
the. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. That was very weird.
Okay.
We had a we had a slight technical issue with my Zoom that crashed when we started the webinar. Maybe there's too many people in here.
True.
It wouldn't be a live event unless something broke. So now we know it's live.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. This is not pre-recorded. Actual computers are crashing. We're burning some GPUs here. Let's see. Maybe we'll give it like another 2 minutes.
Yeah, while everybody's joining, I'm curious where are people calling in from? The UK, what's up? I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. We got any other Texans in the house?
Oh, good. A lot of people.
Houston, what's up, neighbor?
Anybody from California?
Looks like someone from the Bay Area. Tammy, what's up? San Francisco. Love it.
Live event production company. That sounds fun.
We give it one more minute and then get to it.
Yep.
Cool. David,
I'm
remind me,
actually
you're in San Francisco?
Yeah. I mean, I'm like next to San Francisco. I'm in San Mateo.
Okay.
Close enough.
Bay Area.
You know, everybody just says Bay Area. Sounds
Yeah.
cooler. Let me get this guy set up here. Cool. All right. Let's just get going. All right. So uh let's see. I'll get my chat window set up here as well. Cool. All right. So thank you everyone for joining. So yeah, so I think everyone here is, I think everyone here is from the sales and go-to-market space. The reason why we're doing this webinar just, we've been building, both Brandon and I has been, building and operating the sales and go-to-market space for a while. And I think anybody that's been in the space kind of knows in the past year, in the past year or two, there has just been a tremendous amount of change that's happening in space, right? A lot of it's caused by AI, a lot of it's caused by automation, a lot of it's probably just caused by, probably some bad decisions that kind of just the general industry has made over the past couple of years, which we could get into a little bit. But I think the TLDR is, I think now we're just at an inflection point in the space, right? A lot of what used to work isn't working. And I think everybody, from the startups building in the space to, operators actually kind of, in sales are just trying to figure out what the next steps are and what the next best practices are. And, I think in some ways this is, a little bit scary in that, a lot of the older strategy doesn't work. And in some other ways, it's just a huge opportunity, right? In some other ways, I think that, the people that could really sort of figure out how the space is going to evolve from first principles is really going to come out just be way ahead of anybody else because the entire industry is just getting completely turned upside down. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today, right? So I think for this webinar we'll have a lot of tactical stuff, but we're also just going to try to just uncover some of the hidden truths that we see in the space, right? Just to basically help everyone just make decisions for yourself, right? Which kind of wanting to know what's actually driving a lot of these changes that's happening. So that's our goal here. And also just, we also want this to be like an actually interactive webinar, right? So it's a webinar. It's not like a pre-recorded stuff. It's not, I don't think we just want to talk for the whole time. And in that case, you could just go watch a YouTube video. So if you have any questions or whatnot, just like raise your hand and like just shoot it over in the chat, and we could just, we could just answer kind of as we go. So let's just try to make it as interactive as possible. So with that being said, let's try to just get a little bit feel for the room here. We actually just want to kind of understand our customer, just want to understand our views a little bit better. So can you guys actually just type in the chat? We just have some like high level question we have for you guys. So of everyone that's attending the webinar, so how many of you guys actually have how many of you guys are sort of in the manager position? That you have a SDR BDR team? Can we get just type like yes or no, or raise your hand too. Okay, so somebody raise their hand. So how many are individual contributors? Oh, nice. Okay. So ICs. Cool. How many of you guys are familiar with AI tools? Like, are you using like, I don't know, ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude? Okay, awesome. All right, so I think that's good. I will report them. Yeah. Okay, awesome. All right, so it's okay. So at least it looks like maybe like half of you guys are kind of relatively familiar with sort of AI tools, and the other half is like aware, but you're very curious about it. Okay, that's awesome. That's a good makeup. And just the last kind of more broad one are what are some key questions that you have that you would just like us to address today? So I see one person who's mentioned key tools that you need help look in. Okay. Well, I think this is just kind of keep this question on top of your mind, and as it comes up, we could just type in the chat, and we could address it. So let's get going here. So, just high level agenda, right? So we'll talk a little bit about who we are, just to set the context a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about why spray and pray doesn't work, and then we'll talk about how, from our experience, what is working. So just really quick, let's do a quick intro. Brendan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. I've been in sales for about a decade or so, started as an SDR, and eventually built out a sales team of AEs and SDRs and ops. And I've built a couple of companies in the sales tech space and have been at a couple of bigger companies, Zoom Video, and then most recently at Apollo. And I'm currently writing a newsletter called The Signal.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Brandon. So just a really quick about myself. So I'm the CEO of a company called Omni. We're building in the AI space. In a past life, so I'm actually from a product engineering background, so I'm really kind of approaching this from outside in. So in the past life, I used to work a little bit at NASA. So I used to basically work on their Mars rover program, and then I also spent some time working in another startup. So I co-founded another startup 8 years ago that basically did essentially an enterprise customer experience platform. Grew that company to 200 people, raised $25 million, did the whole startup journey. Exited that startup a few years ago to start my current company, purely just because the latest generation of AI models has been so amazing that I just couldn't sit still. I just feel like I just need to be in the space and just really really kind of really build the next generation of AI products. So and here we are today. So yeah, so let's start by just setting the context, which is why do we think spray and pray is working? Well, why do we think that spray and pray is no longer working? So Brandon, over to you.
Yeah, sure. And I won't take a ton of time on this. I think probably this resonates with some of y'all, if not everyone here. And I think that there are a few different reasons why we're seeing kind of on the front lines that spray and pray doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work like it used to. I think there are kind of specific reasons for that. I think that's cheaper software, cheaper than ever to build software, which means there's tons and tons more competition. I think it's something like 30% more companies enter the market every year. So every space is super competitive today. I think ZERP era is, the kind of zero interest rate environment is behind us now, which means that there are leaner teams and tighter budgets. We're no longer kind of running this growth at all cost playbook. We actually want to grow efficiently. And I think the other thing is like this playbook has become known over the past 5 or 10 years. I would call it kind of like the traditional predictable playbook, predictable revenue playbook has become a known entity. And so a lot of people are deploying this, which means there's just kind of less alpha in doing it. You can go to the next slide here. Yeah, I think the other thing, so yeah, spam filters, I think is another big one. I don't know if folks are seeing that. I'd be curious in the chat if you all are seeing it, if you're experiencing more difficulty at finding it more challenging to get, past spam filters. I think that a lot of this stuff is, again, kind of a remnant of the times that we used to be in. But as David mentioned, I very much so believe that we are at an inflection point in technology and specifically the go-to-market playbook where we can actually use tools, AI as a tool to be able to kind of combat this. And I also personally am like, I want to create go-to-market motions that are not just a bunch of spam that's thrown out there. I want to kind of create more efficiency in the marketplace, which means from like a pipeline perspective, and even closing deals and post-sale, connecting sellers and buyers in an efficient way, and kind of supporting a consultative strategic sales motion. So I think that's like the world that I'm trying to explore and trying to build towards. You can go to the next slide. So what is clear, just to kind of finalize the point here, what is clear is this old model doesn't work. So hiring a ton of SDRs, buying a ton of tools and letting them spray and pray in hopes to book a number. This playbook just doesn't work like it used to. It kind of worked 3 years ago. I'm not saying it's completely dead today, but there are diminishing returns to it. And then you can go to the next slide. I think the kind of the data clearly paints this picture. So you may have seen data like this, but you can look at like the quota of SDRs has fallen significantly over the last few years. The number of quality conversations per day has gone down year over year. And then the number of attempts required to book a meeting continues to go up year over year. There's just more noise in the world, right? There's more emails, there's more pings, there's more Slack messages and texts. And I think, anecdotally, I personally feel this. And so as we think about building a sales motion today in this noisy world, I think there's a lot of interesting ways to architect that that helps you kind of find the alpha. So I'll pass it back to you, David.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually kind of curious. Everyone here is in go-to-market. I mean, what are your current strategies? Is anybody, still kind of all in on spray and pray? Is anybody getting results from spray and pray? Can we get like I don't know, like raise your hand if you are getting results from spray and pray? There are actually cases where it still work, by the way. So we're not, I think if there's one takeaway from the webinar, it's that, we do want everyone to kind of understand the trade-offs you're really making with all these methodologies, right? And, in some cases, we have actually seen some cases where it actually worked. Yeah, conferences is actually making a big comeback. So somebody just mentioned you're going to a lot more in-person events, and yeah, that's very true. Ready to cut ties next month. Yep, 1,000 email and 1 meeting. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good number, actually. Yeah, yep, that's very true. And and I think that is kind of the state of the industry we're at, right? It's like, and this is probably a good segue for our for the next slide, which is just while building Omni, right, we've been in the market for 1.5 years. We have about 100 customers. We talk to hundreds of companies every quarter. And we get a really, really nice kind of diverse breadth of information coming to us. So, we see all sorts of different plays and from all sorts of different kind of companies. We work with both growth stage startups all the way to Fortune 500s. And really the short of it is, there's just so much nuance. There's so much nuance, in the industry. There's no one size fits all anymore. That being said, I do think there's almost two polar opposite approaches right now, right? And the two polar opposite approaches that we see that actually is working. So one is what I would call spur and pray 2.0. So that's kind of like the personalization at scale play, right? And I think if anybody sort of is kind of big on like following, I don't know, like the sales influencer on LinkedIn, that's kind of the play that's really blowing up right now is the spur and pray 2.0 play. And there's a lot of technologies that's being built right now to really, make spur and pray 2.0 work. So, so there's companies like Instantly that I think is kind of really doing super well right now, right? There's a company like Clay that's doing super, super well right now. I think there's like a bunch of other ones that, that kind of essentially more or less around the same thing. And essentially what their strategy is they're really doing what I call a technology arbitrage, right? So they're using, a technology shift to basically kind of bypass some kind of, some older sort of spam filtering algorithms because they're using sort of the latest generation technology. They're kind of using like, kind of automated domain purchasing. They're kind of using a lot of these like mailbox automations to get around a lot of the current, to kind of get around a lot of current generation sort of spam filtering algorithms. So to be fair, that actually does work in some ways, right? I think the key learning here is that that's no longer a one size fits all approach. So what used to be is kind of let's say pre 2019, right? That's basically what everybody did, right? And that's why outreach and sales law it did so well previously. It's because that's all you need to do is you just need to load up your sequences, and that sequences will guarantee some set of activity. But now you need to get super, super sophisticated. Yeah. Yeah. So now you need to get super, super sophisticated. You kind of need to know the tech very well. And the other trade-off here is that this actually now only works. What we've seen is for companies with very, very, very large TAM, right? So you need to have millions and millions of companies in TAM because you're not going to get the same deliverability rate that you get before, right? As somebody mentioned, like a 1% rate before in the chat. I mean, the best that we've seen is like 2% or like 2.5%, right? So you are still, you could kind of still there's still some margins you could squeeze out of this, right? You could still squeeze like an extra percentage or two out of this. But it's definitely not going to go back to like the 5 to 10% that you were seeing before, right? And that's kind of why we're seeing this play only work if your TAM is like hundreds of thousands or millions of companies, and you have a relatively small deal size, and that's kind of where this is still economical. That's approach number one. Approach number two, which is that I think this is kind of where I think it's kind of being underappreciated. It's almost like which is what we call an account-based sales approach. And that's almost like kind of essentially going back to the fundamentals, right? So account-based sales is it's the polar opposite. So instead of, having as big of an account list as possible and like really spraying, you actually spend all your effort upfront, do a lot of prioritization, right? Really focus on building a relationship, really come with a point of view, right? Be super consultative. So that's actually the approach that we found to be working better. And that's where we're seeing all the alpha is right now. And, but it is actually the more difficult approach. And, and I think it's the approach it's almost like a muscle memory that was lost in the previous couple of years because everybody got too addicted to automation. So we stopped building that skill set within companies. So we almost, just as an industry, we almost need to relearn that skill set of how to do proper, how to have a proper account-based approach to sales. So so anyways, that's just to kind of set the stage here. Okay, so I see one question from chat here. How are we gauging who has a high probability response? I'm assuming this is based on the account-based sales approach that we're talking about. We'll actually cover this in a bit. So maybe we'll answer the question already. So okay. So anyways, let's kind of dive into what this account-based sales approach is. So I think for us, for specific this webinar, we'll go a little bit deeper into account-based sales, just because I think the Spur and Play 2.0 is, there's already plenty of content on that, and there's like a million other like B2B influencers talking about that, and there's all the blogs and stuff. So if you want to kind of learn what that looks like, and if you want to learn how to like use Clay really well or use Instantly really well, like there's plenty of content on that. So I don't think we need to cover that as much. But we do want to cover the area that we think is under addressed. So this is kind of just why I outlined before, right? So there's essentially we kind of divide up into four different steps in account-based sales. They just kind of dive right in. So the first step is, the first step with account-based sales is like, obviously just being very, very deliberate about, and be very, very careful about exactly what account you're targeting, right? And I think this is a point that maybe sounds a little bit obvious, but I think it's actually, I think it's also one where we see a lot of customers just don't focus deep enough, right? So what a lot of people think account-based sales is basically just, kind of have your ICP defined in a way that's, kind of easily filterable through like the existing like data platform, right? So I think everybody's kind of familiar with sort of your like sales navigator or Zoom info filters where you try to filter on like revenue numbers or company size or growth rate or number of position, number of people in this XYZ title or whatever it is, right? And and I think that's still a good first level filter, but but essentially, even if you are very careful with that filter, right, you still end up with a account list of like tens or hundreds of thousands of accounts, and that's still way too big. So we're from the customers that we have, the people that are really really good at doing this, they have a account list kind of they have account lists like in the thousands, right? So every year they only target like 1,000 or 2,000 companies, and those lists of companies are so unique that it only makes sense for them, right? And the type of filtering they do on those companies are so specific that it only makes sense for them. And I think that's kind of the level of filtering you really need to do here, to just get like as tight of account list as possible, right? And when I say filtering, I kind of what I mean is just give you guys an example. We work with a bunch of like infrastructure companies, right? And one good example of a good filter is like if you sell a data storage solution, what you want to do is you want to find companies that has data needs of 1 petabyte or more, right? So that's a good example, right? And to answer that question, you actually need to have a person go in and research these accounts really well to kind of make sure, okay, what actually is your data needs, right? Do you actually use like real big data of 1 petabyte or more, or are you just kind of a couple hundred gigabyte space, right? And that information is out there on the internet. You can kind of infer it, right? But it's not easily accessible, and it's definitely not like a random filter you can find on Zoom info, right? So that's a good example of something that's specific only to that one company, and it just doesn't make sense for any other company, right? Or you kind of, there's some other examples like, companies that like sells like AI transformation solutions. They would look for companies that recently has launched a AI specific product, right? So that's another good kind of event driven type of filter. Or or companies, if you sell to other SaaS companies, maybe you want to find companies that has a self-serve subscription plan, right? But ultimately, you want to ask these type of questions, you want to kind of filter your account in a way that's like just really, really unique to you. And I think that's really the key here is it needs to make sense only to you. So, and any question on this so far? All right, cool. So yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of curious, has anyone, done something like this? Like, has anyone like deep dive into your account filtering process this much? Is this is this a contrarian opinion, or is this something that you want to do? Who has done this before? If you want to raise your hand. Um, what's preventing? So there's wants. Okay, so what's preventing you guys from wanting to do more of it? Yeah, it does require a lot more upfront work. That's definitely true. Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I do think that, kind of reading between the lines of the answer here, um, I think kind of reading between lines here, I think a good part of it might also just be sort of the general sort of team culture, right? Where I feel like this is just my guess. I feel like a lot of teams sort of prioritize activity at all costs, and they want to kind of just go straight to activity right away. Whereas, account segmentation done properly does require a lot of upfront effort, right? You kind of need to, because at the end of the day, it's a really creative exercise, right? You do need to kind of really think about your ICP really deeply, like figure out what signals actually make sense just for you and uniquely you, right? And it's not something you could just come up with in like a day. So, so I feel like a big reason why a lot of companies are not doing this, because they're just not, maybe they kind of want to just get results right away and get activities on the board right away, and they're actually not prioritizing this enough when this is really one of the most important parts. I mean, does that resonate? Whoever said targeting private equity companies, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think another way that I look at
Yeah.
this, if I can just chime in with one thought, I think the way that I used to think about building a list is kind of the traditional way of like going to a filter and look at a kind of a B2B database, ZoomInfo or LinkedIn Sales Navigator or whatever, and create filters. So I want to look at private equity firms in the US, and I want to look at, this specific title. Okay, cool. There's my list. I'm going to now go after them over the next, few months or whatever. I think in this new world, the way that I think about it, and it's taken me time to get there, but the kind of light bulb moment that I've had is, yes, you still want to focus on your ICP, which is the companies you want to go after. You want to focus on your key buyer personas, which is the titles or the people you want to go after. But more importantly, once you get that list, let's say it's 2,000 people you want to target, the thinking is like, how do you actually use AI and automation to go a layer deeper within that 2,000, right? And figure out who are the 20 that I should reach out to this week. And those 20 people are going to be determined by a bunch of different signals that are only relevant to your business, right? So in the private equity, example, I don't know what you're selling. If you want to chime in and let me know, but like, based on your solution, did they just close a new fund, or did they just expand offices, or there's specific signals in the market that you're going to be able to detect, and AI agents are very good at going and finding that relevant information and surfacing that to you. So again, you can take a list of 2,000 people that you want to target over the next couple of quarters and say, okay, these are the 20 that matter to you today to go after. And in 2 weeks, that list of 20 is going to be very different because these signals are constantly changing. So again, it's kind of a layer deeper. And the last thing I'd mention is, if you think about, again, like kind of a filter list that you would traditionally use to build a list, they might not have certain data points that are relevant that you really want to use, right? So it's things that you would manually look up. So that might be, for private equity, it's like, I don't know, AUM or something. They probably don't have that, specific field in, a certain, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, for instance. And so, you start thinking about how can I layer on multiple signals and have kind of these research agents going out and finding them for you automatically and then surfacing them to you. So you kind of have this like superpower tool that's always working on your behalf and enabling you to kind of use that information in like very thoughtful outreach and multi-thread. And yeah, to David's point, I think most importantly, like selecting the right companies and contacts at the right time, which is, in my opinion, like the highest order thing that we're trying to do as go-to-market folks.
We got a good question from the chat earlier about what's kind of the needed team composition to execute this well? Like, is this something that you need a RevOps person to do? Is this something you need an AE to do? Curious for your thoughts there.
That's a great question, actually. I could speak for I could speak for startups. Honestly, I think for startups, I think I think the executives need to own it, because this is such a core part of defining your ICP, and it's such a core part of, like, because it's a core, like, if you understand this very well, then it's fundamentally just tied to whether you have product market fit or not. So I think for a startup, it just makes sense that, like, just the co-founders or executives should own this. For bigger companies, I don't know. I'm not super opinionated on that one.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say it definitely depends. I think the answer to that, from what I've seen, is very unclear right now. I think companies are still trying to figure it out. I think you can think about kind of, there's two different camps in this. One is, yeah, top down. I think the other is kind of this ground up approach where you're actually building, like, individuals are able to do this. And I think centralizing it with someone like RevOps, ideally, or maybe a growth marketer, kind of this, probably like a new sort of role where they're actually helping build some of this infrastructure. But to David's point, like the creativity that the kind of the tops down strategy around it, I think has to come from ideally the executive team or the founders, to be able to determine, like, these are the things that that make a really good lead, to some degree. But I think, I as a former salesperson myself, I think there's a lot of very helpful knowledge from individual contributors that that gets overlooked oftentimes. So being able to actually kind of surface that stuff and saying, like, hey, this is what a great lead looks like to me. Here's what the company looks like, and here's the research that I typically do, and it takes me 20 minutes to look across all these different sources. Those are the sort of rich insights that you want to think about. And then doing it manually, I saw somebody else talking about kind of how to scale it. I think the second piece is, like, first, do it manually. Figure out what works. Do the manual research before you try to scale it. Send one-off emails before you try to scale it. And then you can think about, okay, what is the team composition? How do we scale it? What is the headcount to actually scale this thing over time? What are the tools to scale it? That sort of thing. But I think step one is really, like, how do you just think about doing something manually and then scaling it over time?
Yeah, I think maybe you could kind of invert the question a little bit, which is what you shouldn't do. And I just think that's probably an easy one to answer. And what you shouldn't do is, the person who owns this shouldn't just treat this as a purely automation exercise, because it is a creativity exercise, and you do need to have deep understanding of who your customers are and what problem you're solving. And that could be at the individual level, or that could be at the management level. And ideally everybody would kind of, like, collectively, like, combine that information somewhere, right? And, like, everybody has that exact same view of who their customers are. But for bigger orgs, I know that's really hard. But I think that the one thing is clear is that it should not just be pure automation. And I think that's kind of the mistakes that a lot of people make, is they just look at all these sales processes as an automation exercise. Okay, so anyways, let's move on here before we still have a bunch of other stuff to talk about. So essentially, first step, right? Really deliberate, really aggressive account filtering. That actually is the most important step. So I'm glad we spent a good amount of time talking about that, right? Once you know exactly who your key accounts are, right? Once you know exactly what you want to target for this week, we actually want you to go one layer deeper, right? And this is actually where the best sales reps really stand out. If you talk to the best sales reps in the world that kind of selling a kind of large enterprise deal, right? So what we call, like, the elite sellers, and you talk to them, they're almost like talking to a consultant, right? It's almost like you're talking to, like, a partner at McKinsey, right? Because they have a very strong point of view about the market, about where the industry is going. They have a very strong point of view about how that company is doing. They have a very strong point of view about how their solution could help their companies achieve their goals, right? And I think this is kind of what really differentiates, especially now, because there's so much noise from automation, right? And this is actually what really differentiates a top seller from sort of your kind of standard, like, average seller. This is kind of just all of our learning. This is kind of a high level summary of all of our learnings working, and talking with so many sales reps in the past year and a half. Is the ones that really actually are still hitting quota today are just like they just have a fundamentally different mindset on approaching, how they communicate with their customers, right? And a big part of that, like if you kind of go down a little bit more, tactically, a big part of that is, they don't actually use sort of your typical sales tools, right? They spend actually most of their days just essentially doing a lot of market research, right? A lot of industry research. So they're not like always like they're not like on Zoom Info all day or on Apollo all day, right? But they're just doing a lot of Googling, they're asking a lot of questions to ChatGPT. They have their, if they're like selling to a particular vertical, they're kind of subscribed to the journals of all those verticals, so they know what's going on, right? Like if you're selling to healthcare, you should subscribe to all the healthcare journals. If you're selling to manufacturing, you should subscribe to the manufacturing journals. And that's actually what allows them to develop a very, very strong point of view, right? And that very strong point of view is actually going to be what makes you stand out. The last thing I would kind of call out here, and this is kind of something we learned, is in some ways the point of view it almost doesn't matter whether your point of view is correct or not, because obviously the customer is going to know their problem better than you from outside looking in, right? So you don't need to obsess so much about having a correct point of view, but what really matters is for you to actually just have a well-reasoned point of view that you could just use to start a conversation with the customer. And to the customer, what they really care about is, does this person know what they're talking about, right? Like when you reach out to them with a strong point of view, even if it's wrong, it will be immediately clear to the customer that you've done your work, right? You're someone that's actually worth taking the time to jump on a call with because you have interesting information, because you've done all this research, right? And even if they don't buy your solution, you can at least add some value to to them by just all the research that I've already done. So I think that's actually sort of the key learnings that we had just working with our customers. Just have a point of view period. It doesn't even need to be correct, right? It just needs to be well reasoned, and it just needs to actually just be rational and make sense.
David,
so that's kind of the second. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so I was just going to say, I mean, I think for a lot of folks in the chat, like, might be wondering, there's a big difference between where a lot of SDRs and AEs are today and what you're talking about. Like, how do you get them from this sort of like 2019, 2020 mindset of automation and spray and pray to what you're talking about right now?
Man, that's such a hard question. That's a $1 million question. I mean, I think, well, I mean, if you're in this webinar, you're definitely in the right place. So that's number one. I think there's a lot of noise in the market right now about like what's the, how do you solve for sales? But I think a lot of it sort of, are still kind of stuck on just doing more of what used to work. So I think a lot of it is just about really realizing that you need to just fundamentally change your process, right? And and hopefully that message kind of gets to whoever in your company that runs the entire sales work. I think it's something that just needs to happen on the entire company level, right? This is more of a cultural shift than anything else. And of course, like that sort of leads to using different tooling and whatnot, but like the tools almost doesn't really matter here, right? It's more about like how do you got to start off by just fundamentally changing your mindset.
Yeah, what I've found, I'll just offer this, like what I've found over the past few months that I've started playing around with some of the tools is like I just like technology, so I'm tinkering around with the tools. And then what I found is as I've played with different models, I've actually run into kind of like a roadblock of like my creativity. And it's very obvious very quickly that like you can do some incredibly powerful things with ChatGPT, with Claude 3.5, if you've used that, which is Anthropic, with Perplexity. And as you play, and I would encourage you to play around with multiple models. I think, you'll start to see there's like good use cases for different models. But you can start to say like, okay, I'm going to put in this call script, or I'm going to put in, you can just go download a quarterly earnings call and drop that into Claude and say, give me the top 3 strategic initiatives at this company, right? Like, what are the things, I would just think about what are the things that you are typically researching, and how do you try to use AI, to do this on your behalf? And these help you kind of say, okay, these are the things that kind of start to work. These are the things that aren't really good use cases. And you'll start to see some patterns where you can build repeatable motions or workflows in your daily workflow. I think that's like a good first stepping stone. I totally agree though, to David's point, like it's definitely not about, you know, the tool necessarily, like that's just a means to an end. Really, it's about like us as humans that are building these creative experiments, that are thinking about how do I strategically find the right information at a company? How do I strategically position that information in a compelling narrative to the prospect? And so anyway, I think those are like things you can just start tinkering with today and start training your brain of like, oh, instead of going to Google, let me go to ChatGPT. Instead of going to, you know, Salesforce and looking at a bunch of custom fields, how do I just drop something into Claude and have it analyze this data for me? And I think that will start enlightening you of like, hey, these are the type of things that might be possible. And the last thing I'll say is like the thing that I continually remind myself is like this stuff is only going to get better over time, and it's going to get better, in my opinion, very, very fast over the next year or two. And so I'm just thinking about how am I kind of learning with these systems and not being overwhelmed. I'm not trying to like drive FOMO and be like, you know, you need to be using AI every day, all day. But I do think over the next 6 months or 24 months, if you know, every couple days pop in and spend 10 or 20 minutes using these tools, you're going to pop up in 2 years and be in a very good position, in my opinion, particularly for go-to-market folks.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, exactly. You know, there is still some skills to be learned. Like, you know, AI feels like it's something that I think a lot of people kind of get the wrong perception where they will ask ChatGPT one question and maybe it doesn't get it perfectly right, and you know they kind of write off the whole, you know, the whole AI set, right? But you know, prompt engineering is still kind of a skill set, right? There's a lot of talks right now about how prompt engineering is dead and you know you're never going to need it, whatever. And I say maybe that will be true in like 5 years, but it is still a skill set you have to build over time, right? And there are ways of like, you know, framing your question for the AI, you know, where it could, you know, be truly helpful. And you know, and I think a lot of the, you know, I think the one common mistake I see a lot of people make when they try to use AI tools is that they just try to have the AI tell you the answer right away, right? You know, which is usually not the right question to ask, right? So like for example, if you just, you know, if you just put in like an earnings call transcript and just say, hey, like, you know, what should I say to like to sell to this company? And if you just ask them for the answer right away, it's, you know, it's not going to give you anything super clever, right? Because at the end of the day, that act of discovery, the, you know, of discovering the problem, of building that point of view, that's still something that only you can do, right? That's still something that humans is still pretty good at. But what AI could do is it can help you synthesize information very, very quickly, and it can help you sort of reframe that earnings call into sort of, you know, maybe another format that's like easily digestible. That you could, and you can make that connection from the earnings call to like something else that the customer has said last week, to like some other like articles that you read, and to really connect those dots to help you form that point of view. But I mean, ultimately, you still have to do that creative work. So I think that's kind of the just a general framework to keep in mind is, you know, AI is not it's also not a panacea, right? It's not going to solve all your problems for you, but it's just a really, really good, you know, it's just a really good sort of, you know, bicycle for your brain, basically. So anyways, I know we have 15 minutes left, so let's kind of like, maybe I'll speed run through the last couple parts, because actually, I mean, the first two parts is actually the more important one. So in terms, so you know, let's kind of go a little bit more tactical here, right? So as we kind of go through the slides, we get a little bit more and more tactical, right? So once you develop your point of view, so okay, well, so what next? So now you need to actually work on your messaging to the customers, right? To your prospects, and this is kind of where, you know, you start getting into this like buzzword of personalization, right? And I think that, you know, the TLDR here is the common mistake we see with personalization is people try to put too many irrelevant information in personalization. So I think a lot of people tend to take the word personalization too literally, right? And you know, and I think we all have gotten emails at this point where it's like somebody mentioned like the university we went to, or like a past job, or you know, whatever it is, right? Or maybe like some sports team or whatever it is. And that's almost kind of got to a point where that's just noise at this point, right? Because it's happened so often, it's so over automated that it's just like a, your brain just kind of just look past that at this point. And I think that probably if we kind of take a step back, I think the first principle way to look at this is that uh, anything that could be automated away is essentially a race to the bottom, right? If the way that you're creating these personalized messages is just through some random automation, that means everybody else is doing that same automation, right? And ultimately, maybe you get some quick wins, right? As maybe it's a new automation, you get some quick wins for a few months, but ultimately it's a race to the bottom, in the long run. So I think just the way to always think about this is always kind of find a way to add your own personal touch, right? So again, going back to how do you be unique, right? Like based on your own point of view, based on the own product you're selling, the own solution that you have, like how do you really make this a unique personalized way to reach out? Um,
Yeah,
like
David, actually, I just got a question here. I mean, I think curious like what so if everybody's using the same tools, right? Like how do you effectively write messages that stand out? And I'm sure Brendan also you've got a perspective on this. I see some logos on slides 17, 18, and I know we'll get to those eventually. But just curious at a high level, like how do you think about tools and tactics for doing this in a way that's not just going to be copied by everybody else?
I think it goes back to kind of understanding, in any specific industry, what are the key sort of challenges that industry has and that companies have, and really just try to add some value, right? So this kind of goes like if you develop a good point of view and you really understand your industry really well, then it should be a little bit easier. So like for example, one of our customers, they always try to send interesting articles. Like this is like a really simple one, right? But they always try to send interesting articles to their clients because I think their clients are like, other sort of I forgot like exactly what industry they're targeting, but their clients are, they're in a fast moving industry and there's like new kind of regulations and rules kind of that's popping up all the time, right? So one of our customers is always just trying to stay on top of that and just always trying to send them some interesting kind of new piece of information they find in their own research on industries, through their own sales process. And it's a win-win, right? Because the customer actually wants to receive that email because they actually responded to him and say, hey, this is like super interesting, like how did you find this is like super useful, right? Because every business is actually looking for more business intel, right? Like in your own, like just think about like in your own business, there's always probably some piece of information that you want to know, right? Some piece of key business intel that you want to know that you just wish someone could just like send to you, right? That would probably solve a lot of problems. So everybody's out always looking for new information, and as a seller prospecting in that industry, right, you're also looking for interesting information as well. So really, it just makes sense to connect the dots, right? You want to understand your customer well enough that you know what kind of information you're looking for, deliver some real value, right? Start that conversation. Yeah, the white papers are downloading, right? Websites are visiting and whatnot. I think there are some signals that kind of point you in the right direction, right? And it is very industry agnostic, but I think a lot of times just sending out some key piece of information, I think it's a really good it's a really good tactic right now. Yeah, Brandon, I don't know if you have any thoughts here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think you covered a lot of it. I do think that I mean my controversial take I'd say is maybe that signals as I would define it is kind of first and third party signals. So first party being your own CRM or marketing automation, data warehouse, any marketing activities. If people are opening an email or if people are reading emails, that's also interesting signals. And then third party is like, did somebody change a job or did they fundraise or did they, implement a tool that your product integrates with or whatever? That would be a third party signal. I think about like tracking these things, and basically to me, the controversial take is the message matters far less than choosing the right company in person at the right time. And so what I mean by that is when you get all these signals, they should help determine which companies and people you're going after and when. And then, of course, you should use those in your message in many cases. Not in all cases, by the way, like a website visitor, you may not want to actually say, I saw you're on my website. but you do want to use that signal as a guide to help you determine that you should reach out to that person and or that company that was on your website, as one example. So I generally think that, like, yeah, personalizing messaging, obviously you should do it. But the best emails are the ones that are to the right company, the right person at the right time. And then it kind of makes the message matter far less if they're in market for your product. You know, as long as you have a decent message, a decent offer, it should convert.
Yep, agreed. Let's actually, I mean, we talked a little bit more about our reach, but I think we can actually skip that part. Let's actually just talk a little bit more about the tools here, and then you know, we have some slides about 2025 that I don't want to skip because I think those are important. So you know, just a quick kind of overview about the kind of tools that we think will be really helpful, right? So this is the tools that we think will be helpful for specific for account-based sales, right? So you know, to kind of really do all the steps that we mentioned before, it is a lot of work, right? Because you know, it is a lot about like deep understanding and kind of building the right context, developing a point of view. And you know, and I think the key here is that no tool is going to be able to completely automate this for you, right? And you actually don't want to have a tool to automate all this for you, because if somebody automate everything for you, like automate all that steps for you, then it's just another race to the bottom, and it's just no longer be effective, right? So the way that we kind of think about tools is, you know, how do we use tools to basically help you reach that point of view, help you get to that, you know, kind of get to the right accounts faster, right? But ultimately, you still have to be the one to decide, okay, this is the right account, is this the right ICP, is this the right point of view, right? And so these are kind of some of the tools that we think is super helpful, just to kind of across all stages, right? So for like building account lists, there is actually a lot of automation that specifically integrates AI agents, or they kind of use some sort of like pretty, you know, like pretty advanced like vector search to basically try to find lookalike companies. So there's different ways of like really filtering down your account list. I think that the key here is to not just use your standard lead gen type of filters, but really kind of just go one layer deeper and, you know, can make something that's uniquely for you. For sort of both the account strategy research and account-based prospecting plays, you know, I'll plug Omni a little bit here. That's kind of what we do, but there's a lot of other companies that in this as well. That's kind of, you know, there's a lot of these kind of next generation account-based kind of orchestration platform, right? That sort of, you know, that kind of orchestrates, you know, pulling information from different sources and kind of just, you know, putting it together in a nice consumable way to really help you understand the account in a very deep way. You know, we think that we do it pretty well, but you know, Pagio also do it pretty well, right? And in terms of the actual account-based plays, right? So there is some automation you could build, you know, to kind of help you kind of, you know, generate your deliverables faster. I think, you know, Orchestra and Common Room also does that very well as well. And you know, I think the last part that we haven't actually talked about too much is, you know, in terms of the actual outreach, don't just stick to emails, right? There's a lot of other channels. You know, I mean, I said LinkedIn is. I said a lot of people have moved to LinkedIn. Also, LinkedIn is also kind of getting spammy, right? I think everybody has like a pretty much overflowing LinkedIn inbox at this point. So you know, but there are still a lot of other different channels. I think somebody mentioned in-person events earlier, definitely making a big comeback just because there's so much automation. But you can also take advantage of your network as well, right? So whether it's like your own customer network or your investor network or just your network, your own employees, there's a lot of sort of these type of plays you could run, and there's a lot of products that can help you there as well. And we could send out the slides later so you guys could check out these products. But you know, I don't want to spend too much time going through each one, just for sake of time. Yeah. So same. So last bit just about us, right? So if you do this is like more or less about Omni, but it's just kind of more about if you actually do this correctly. If you actually do this correctly, the reply rates you should be getting is like 15%, right? So the customer we work with, they're regularly getting double-digit reply rates. And that's the fundamental difference, right? Is that you start off with a much smaller, you know, top of the funnel because you do such aggressive, you know, account filtering. But at the end of the day, right, you get a lot more actual customers because reply rates is much higher. And just purely from a technical perspective, you don't kill your domain reputation, right? You spend a lot less time kind of setting up all this random email infrastructure and doing all this like domain, you know, redirects, which is just like a RevOps nightmare to kind of set all this stuff up. It's actually, you know, kind of all in all, it's actually a lot less trouble than trying to go through this whole complicated process of just, you know, doing massive volume, just because there's so much there's sort of so much technical roadblocks now just to get around like aggressive spam filters. So this is what a good, this is what a good number should look like when you actually do this properly. So with that, let me hand it over back to Brandon for what 2025 looks like.
Ooh, all right, that's the big question.
The $1 million question. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No pressure.
Let's jump to the next slide here. Well, first of all, yeah, let me preface with the saying, like I definitely do not know for sure. These are some of the areas that I'm looking into. What, kind of talking with some companies today that I'm seeing, work in terms of generating pipeline. That's optimizing inbound flows. That's doing cold outbound. That's doing what I call warm outbound or signal-based selling. Even post-sale, upsell, cross-sell stuff. So I think there's basically 5 things that I'm thinking about. I call these kind of arrows in the quiver of a modern go-to-market or pipe gen machine. So signal-based selling, we've talked about a lot today. This is typically run by what I'm seeing kind of a go-to-market engineer being called. This is kind of like an outbound ops person or maybe a rev ops person or growth marketer. Warm intros, I think, is very interesting. So instead of just reaching out to a contact cold, figuring out like, do I have a common customer with them, or do I have an advisor or an investor with them, or trying to find a warm path in. AI agents. So obviously Omni is a great example of this. So this is like companies that are powering enterprise sellers and kind of coming alongside them and being tools to kind of make them superhuman, if you will. Partner selling, I think, is also interesting. So figuring out how to crack that. And then, David mentioned this a second ago. I think LinkedIn is very interesting. Obviously, if you're selling to people that are on LinkedIn, so doing kind of founder or exec brand, and then also leveraging B2B influencers. So this is more maybe on the marketing side. Yeah, I think what is the next slide here? I think we talked about this a little bit, but yeah, I mean, basically thinking about the return to rigor. So the ZERP era is behind us. So I think the things that are working are hard. And that's okay. That's where the alpha is doing the hard things that don't necessarily scale, figuring out what works, and then at a certain point saying, okay, let's actually scale this and use a tool to maybe automate parts of it and maybe continue to do things more manually and use these tools as kind of co-pilots alongside your daily workflow. That's what I've got.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a great last slide. That really is the high level takeaway is, I love the phrase return to rigor. And that sort of sums it all up. All right, we're ending right on the minute. Anybody has the last question that we can answer in 1 minute? If not, I mean, here's our contact info. I mean, feel free to reach out to us anytime. Brandon also writes a really, really interesting and like really awesome newsletter. So please sign up for that. Like we're a subscriber. We read it all the time. It's got a lot of great insights. And definitely check us out as well. We're really into this whole space. We've been spending a lot of time really deep dive into AI agents. We think we have one of the best research agents in the market right now to really just help you supercharge your account-based sales motion. So yeah, check us out and we'll send you guys the slides. Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. We're right on the minute, literally around a second. So thank you, everyone. All right. See ya.